Welcome to the Leadership Journal with your hosts, Nick Helgett and Robbie Woodard,
where we cover our journey, struggles, and obstacles that we have overcome, and moments in our careers that have led to growth. Here on Table Talk each week, where we break down various topics and journals of our trials and tribulations. All right, okay. All right, everybody. Welcome back to today's episode here in the Leadership Journal. We got a fun one we're ready to talk about, and it's about emotional intelligence, and I'm going to pass it to Nick to kick us off.
Emotional intelligence, it was a topic that was brought to me when I first started my journey in leadership, and I didn't really understand what it meant. And so I want to try and at least define it a little bit, and we'll dissect it from there. So emotional intelligence in relation to leadership refers to the ability of a leader to recognize, understand, and manage their own emotions, as well as the emotions of others. The skill is essential for effective leadership, as it influences how leaders communicate, make decisions, and interact with their teams. So, to break it down, self-awareness, understanding how your emotions affect others, and truly, how you affect yourself. Self-regulation, ability to manage those emotions. I've heard authors say, detach. Motivation, how do you use those emotions to either motivate yourself or your team, those around you? Showing empathy for your teammates, for your peers, for your team members. And then just overall social skills, proficiency in managing your relationships, building networks, and navigating social complexes to lead effectively. With high emotional intelligence, with people with high emotional intelligence, they're often very successful in fostering positive work environments, enhancing team collaboration, and driving overall organizational performance. And I've seen that firsthand, but I've also seen where, my own personal experience where that can go too far one way. You guys have anything to add to that?
Well, what I love is that this touches on specifically 5 things: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. So going one at a time. Self-awareness. Why is that? Why do you guys think that is important when we consider being leaders? What is the number one thing that comes to mind?
Honestly, I think that self-awareness is probably one of the most important parts of getting started with high emotional intelligence. Like Nick, you were saying, right? Being able to detach a little bit. And I think to kind of unpack that a little bit further, right? Not necessarily not feeling your emotions or not acknowledging them, but the ability to feel them, understand them, and not let them negatively influence your decision making. And it takes a lot of self-awareness to be able to do that. It's a very human situation, right? To be angry, to be depressed, to be offended. Those are all very normal human emotions, and there's nothing wrong with feeling those emotions. But as a leader, you can't let your feelings influence the way that you're going to interact with your team, especially if it's going to cause you to interact with them in a way that will be harmful to their performance, to their development, or to their professional lives. But you also can't let it influence the decisions you make for your business, for your team, maybe not directly to your team, but for your team. You have to be able to isolate some of those, especially negative emotions, from your decisions, from what you do day to day, because if you don't, they can lead you down a path where you're going to make the wrong decision that could ultimately be very harmful to your team, to your business, and to your own career.
I agree 100% everything you said. I think one thing we need to touch on as well is happiness can also fall in that category. Because if you are super happy about the performance of one team member, and you're giving that team member a lot of attention, and you may overlook contributions that other team members are making, and then they feel like their contributions don't matter and that you're playing favorites. So it's definitely a balance of expressing gratitude and showing your happiness when it comes to success, and making sure that you're not overdoing it and focusing on one person.
Well, I think it also goes hand in hand with self-regulation, because being self-aware is very important. Understanding your mental state, understanding your intelligent, your own emotional intelligence and where it currently sits, but then also regulating it, being aware of it, having that understanding of doing, like you said, focusing on one thing at a time, one person too much, and how can you balance that, because it builds into relationships. Everyone has an emotional tie to somebody else along the way, and if you invest too much in one relationship, you're sacrificing another one, and you may not be aware of your bias kicking in because you prefer this person more. Maybe they're easier to talk to, maybe they're harder to talk to, and you don't have that connection with them yet, so you shy away from having that conversation with them. So challenging yourself in that aspect, in my opinion, is probably the hardest thing to be aware of and to regulate, because we all have people we're comfortable with. How do you get out of that as a leader to push further?
I really like the way that you said understanding your own emotional intelligence. I think that's another part of that too, right? Part of the journey of any leader should be self-improvement, and that's partly why we're doing what we're doing right now, because we've learned some lessons, a lot of them probably the hard way, and it's nice to be able to share some of the things that we've learned with people who are on their journey and might benefit from the hard lessons that we've learned. But in order to learn those lessons, you have to be real with yourself, and you have to be able to know where you're really at. You can't go into learning something thinking you already know everything, because you're not going to make any progress. And so
you mean I can't be a know-it-all and be a leader and be successful?
I mean, I'm not saying you can't know a lot and be a leader and be successful, but you have to know where your own weaknesses are, where your opportunities for growth are, so that you can work on those things. And I think that's also true of emotional intelligence. None of us are perfect. We all slip up, and we all make mistakes and let our emotions influence our decisions. So the important thing is, as far as self-awareness, is understanding when that's probably going to happen, like what triggers you, what is likely to influence your ability to keep your emotions out of your decisions. And you can't figure out where that point is, where you need help, where maybe you need to bring in somebody else to help you with a conversation or help you with a decision or anything like that, if you don't have the self-awareness to know that this is not a good place for me right now.
And I think where that comes from, when I asked you that question sarcastically, as sarcastically as possible, I can't know everything. In that moment, if that's a go-to answer of mine, I'm not regulating. I'm not aware of my own, I'm not aware intelligently enough of my emotional state to say, why am I doing that? And I'm hurting myself in the long run by closing that portion of my thought process. At least from my experience, I'm closing off a portion of my ability to get better. So that's just something that we all have to be aware of. And like we said multiple times on this podcast, the hardest thing to do in any position is being a frontline leader. And you are tasked with so many things at all times of day that when you get stuck in a spot where you're closed-minded, you aren't regulating, you're not aware of anything, and you have an obstacle in front of you that becomes harder and harder to achieve and overcome, because you don't know how to pass that hurdle.
Yep. And so it's also understanding yourself, your own emotions. And then if you're having a negative emotion about a situation that you're confronted with, that you're going through, using that to motivate you to do better. I screwed up today for XYZ reasons. I recognize that. I recognize I let my anger towards this situation or this person, yada yada, to influence me in the wrong way. So now I'm going to use that as a motivational tool for myself to try and not make that mistake again and try to improve the next interaction and prepare myself for the next interaction, so I try not to make that mistake again.
I would say even to plan your next move, right? I mean, who among us hasn't been in a situation where maybe your leadership has made a decision that you don't agree with, and you're the one tasked with presenting that to your team?
Yep.
Right? And when you're upset about that decision because you know your team and you know how they're going to react, and you see the questions they're going to ask, you can hear them already in your head, right? And you can see the outcome because you know you're with these people every day, all the time, right? and you know, you have the self-awareness to know that when I'm upset, I have a tendency to say things I shouldn't say. I'm not saying swearing necessarily or going off on a big rant.
Presenting the wrong message.
Exactly. But you may tell your team, yeah, I got this thing from my boss, and now I got to tell you guys, and your tone is off, your language is off.
I don't agree with it, but this is what we're going to do because...
Right. Or something along those lines, right? If you recognize that is your reaction to being upset about the information that you just received, and you don't want to have to be the one to give that message, then you can plan for how to give that message in an appropriate way that will benefit your team and their performance. You can plan for the questions that they might ask and how you can appropriately and effectively answer those questions in a constructive way, rather than taking this opportunity to vent your frustrations out in front of your entire team with this decision that you don't agree with, right? It gives you time to pause and say, I need to make a course correction because I know what I'm going to do if I'm not prepared.
Yep. And that goes back to the, you can be honest with your team and transparent and be like, hey, the department head wants us to do this thing. I pushed back. I feel like I might be going down that road to damaging that relationship. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do what he's asking. We're going to do what they're asking. And we're going to do it the best of our ability. We're going to, share those results and then try to build that capital to, maybe next time they'll, that leader will be more open to that feedback and that, I guess I'll use the words pushback, so that maybe they'll be more receptive to it next time.
Well, and I definitely think that what Jed was saying is 100% weighted in the correct place of pausing, preparing, and thinking, and not going with your initial gut reaction. We've all been in that spot where
I recently did it.
we've all been in that spot where our initial reaction is the first thing we want to say. But if we're not aware of it, what, like Nick said, what is it going to do to our credibility, to our capital with the third world about being able to maintain that balance between what's going on in the real world, what's going on in the executive world, that we need to have a chance to reflect on, maybe having another meeting with our boss, having another meeting with another peer about why is this getting pushed down, before just running in guns blazing, word vomiting all of these things out, because you can't take back the things you say. They are in the world, they are there, they now exist. And if your team doesn't understand why you're frustrated, or maybe they do understand why you're frustrated, the frustration outweighs every bit of the message you're trying to convey, and you lose everything.
Correct. And then when you do make that mistake, then you have to be humble enough to admit to your peers, to your team, hey, I made the wrong decision here, and here's why. Mm-hmm. And so here's what we need to do going forward. And then again, once we build that trust with that leader, next time we'll have more of a voice.
Well, emotional accountability weighs into a lot of that.
Correct.
I also think beyond just conversations with your direct reports, when you're getting news from your leadership, the people that you report to that you're not happy with, but also having that self-awareness to know that I need a moment before I can really have this conversation in a productive way, gives you the opportunity to say exactly that, right? politely say, I need a little bit. I'd like to talk more about this. I need some time to digest this. And can we schedule a time that we can follow up on this before I deliver this message to my team? And have a much more
yourself.
Have a much more productive conversation with whoever's asking you to deliver this message. Give you an opportunity to think about things that aren't going to occur to you in the moment, right? Because you're upset. I don't want to do this. I'm not thinking about the right questions I should be asking. Yes. I'm thinking about the questions I want to ask to stick it back to that guy who's giving me the news I don't want to hear, and putting me in an uncomfortable position in front of my team, which again is a very human reaction to something that is negative, that is threatening, and it gives you opportunity to have a productive conversation with your boss, so that you can then again be more prepared when it's time to deliver that message, because your team's going to ask a lot of the same questions you did, most likely. I mean, if you're doing the right things and they're thinking about the business the right way, they're going to ask some of those same questions.
I mean, you're talking about the subject matter experts of your team, right? The guys that do the guys and gals that do the job every day,
and they literally can tell you if you're on the correct path or you're going the wrong way.
Now they might, but that might be in reference to the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
And so they're not, and that's your job to connect them with the why this is changing.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that if you're emotionally charged.
No, and that goes back to like the leadership engagement part and the leadership styles conversation we had, where this isn't, in these conversations, this is not at all micromanagement. This is completely leading by how we want our teams to respond emotionally to a situation, a decision, or some change that we all need to be on board for, and it starts with us.
And it really reminds me of the tenured team member that is set in their ways. This is the way we've always done it, but what they're not seeing or thinking about is that processes are changing. Your environment's changing, maybe the way that you conduct your business is changing, it's evolving, and the way we've always done it doesn't apply here anymore. And so if you're not emotionally charged and you're prepared for that conversation, then you're more equipped to connect them to the why.
I also think another benefit of that self-awareness, and I may be spilling into another category here, so if I am, I apologize, but I think another important aspect of that self-awareness when it comes to emotional intelligence is when you understand what triggers you to feel those emotions.
Ooh, that's a good one.
That you can better understand why your team is triggered.
That
right?
stings a little.
Again, right? These are all very human emotions. I know that a lot of our conversation is kind of in the context of giving bad news, and there's a lot more to emotional intelligence than just giving people bad news. Sometimes it's getting bad news. It could be.
Well, that's why I was trying to connect to the happiness, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, it could even be something like, I'll use an example from today, right? This actually happened to me quite a bit in the last couple of weeks, surprisingly. I had a team member come into my office while I was working on something and say, "Hey, do you have a minute? I'd like to talk to you." And, the answer to that is always yes. I'll be late to meetings. I'll whatever, right? And I'll apologize till I'm blue in the face to, my general manager if I need to, but the answer to that question is always yes.
Absolutely.
Why?
Because their needs matter.
Okay.
If they need, that's my job, right? As their leader, I'm here for them. I'm here to support them.
You're there for the people.
100%.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, and I'll take the heat for that. That's my responsibility. And honestly, I'm lucky to have leaders who understand and would do the same thing in my place. So I also have the freedom to make those kinds of decisions when I need to. And that's an amazing thing that I have in my career that not everyone has. But getting back to what I was saying before, right, understanding how you feel in a situation can help you understand how they're probably feeling right now. And so I had an employee come to my office and say, "Hey, do you have a minute? I need to talk to you." And I have no idea what this is about, but I can look at this individual and say, something's off. This is not how they normally present at work. And they went on to tell me that they went on break and they went in the break room, pulled their phone out of their lunchbox, and they had text from their mother that their grandmother was being rushed to the hospital. Doesn't know anything else but yet. just that. And he wanted to let me know that they might not be there much longer. They have to find out more information, but they might have to go and be with their family. And it was a hard day for us in a lot of ways, for my team, as far as meeting our goals for the day. Right, we weren't exactly where we would like to be, and it's very easy to look inwardly and say, no, I need you here doing these things, right?
Your team needs you here.
Your team needs you here. Your company needs you here, right? And to think, well, if this person goes, it's gonna have this cascading effect of impact on my day, right? On my measurables for the day, and that's gonna impact my measurables for the week and the month, and go all the way down that rabbit hole. But by understanding, having that self-awareness of, if I were at work, and this individual is like 19, 20, something like that, right? Very young. Having that self-awareness to put yourself in their shoes, that empathy, and say, if I went in the break room and had a surprise message from a family member that another family member of mine was being rushed to the hospital and may not make it through the night, how would I feel? And what would my priorities be? And how would I want my supervisor to react?
Mm-hmm.
And being able to put yourself in your shoes, it helps you respond to them in a way which is helpful. And ultimately, the conversation that we had was that they didn't know a lot yet, and so they were going to find out more, and they were going to let me know what they needed from me. And they chose on their own, I did not push them at all, that to stay for as long as they could.
Yep.
Until they had a reason to go, right? Until the person was in the hospital and was in a position where they might be able to go see them soon, rather than to just leave and wait around for nothing, right? They communicated with their family, they figured out what they wanted to do, and then they communicated to me. And I said, you do what you need to do.
Yep.
But they stayed for a little while. They did ultimately end up going partway through the day, and it had its own impact, and that is what it is, right? But and while I was aware of all these impacts that were going to be caused by this individual leaving, it helped me understand that that's not the point right now. That's not what's important to them. And I'm here for them as much as I'm here for the business, if not more than I am for the business. And I need to make sure this person is going to get what they need, rather than to react poorly and say, well, what's our production going to look like if you go home?
Yeah, because it's your job to manage the business. They need to manage their family. They
Right.
need to manage their time and figure out what's important.
Yeah.
What
And
their priority is.
I've had supervisors say things like that to me. I've seen supervisors say those things to other people, right? Oh, if you go right now, what's that going to mean for your peers? And I understand where they're coming from, because we all feel the pressure
Yep.
in our roles. But
Whether you're the bottom of the tier for employees or you're the top, everybody, it's going to impact somewhere.
yeah, 100%. But in the long term, whatever we lost today, over the next few years, we will gain back in spades from the loyalty that we'll
Yes.
have gained from that individual, because
Yes.
we treated them like a human being.
Yep.
You
We
will.
helped them meet their needs.
You will. As their leader, you will gain that back.
Absolutely. And with that comes significantly more production
Mm-hmm.
than what we lost today.
It's all about building that leadership capital with your team.
Yeah. And not just from the production aspect, we also were able to do something positive, something that positively impacted somebody's life. And as positive as a situation like that can be,
Correct.
we were able to do something as positive as you can in that situation and support this individual through this situation for as best we could.
Well, and two things. My brain goes to two places when I think about this conversation, because I've had multiple of these in my career. That team member has a relationship with you. That is completely evident, because if that team member did not have any kind of trust, faith, or understanding of you as a leader, do you think that they would have stayed and actually told you about it, or do you think they would have just disappeared?
Oh, absolutely. They would have just disappeared.
Oh, yeah, they're out.
So,
I'm not going to tell you.
And I wouldn't have faulted them for that.
Nope.
and the team, you'd find out later why, but
Or they would have just come and said, I got to go home. I'll see you later.
And having that ability with that team member to have that conversation means that the faith and the emotional connection they have with you, with their team, shows they're invested in the workplace. But if they're not invested in the workplace, they're gonna go the other way. They're gonna just disappear. And then you'll find out later, it'll hurt a little bit that they didn't have that ability to talk to you. But in that moment for me, I've had both instances. Team member disappears, team member talks to me. And then the one where the team member disappears, it's a reflection on my part of, okay, why couldn't they talk to me? Why is it so hard to share something like that with me? Because I was closed to that ability to have that conversation with that team member. I was not open to their concerns, their needs, and their willingness to talk to me just is non-existent. But the more I was investing in conversations with people and with building relationships and having that connection, I saw more and more and more of these positive things occurring in the workplace, and then knowing resources, knowing avenues and things to help people out showed better opportunities for these to come about. And not only for us to be aware, but our team members being aware as well.
Yeah.
Well, I think you showed really great self-awareness in that example. Right? You recognized that something wasn't the way you wanted it to be. And instead of saying, well, what's wrong with that person? What's wrong with that guy that he wouldn't come talk to me?
Yep.
Right? You said, what am I doing that has made me unapproachable?
Yep.
And you recognized something that you wanted to change. And that's how you get started. Without that self-awareness to say, this is probably why that person didn't talk to me about this. This is an area I can improve on. You never improve in that area, and they're never going to come back and talk to you. It's going to continue. They're going to continue, if they come back at all, to do those same things. And you're going to keep being frustrated, and it's going to keep impacting your bottom line, and it's going to keep impacting your relationship with that individual. And it's a very negative and self-perpetuating cycle.
And it goes back to being open, being accountable, and being willing to be a part of your team as their leader, so that they are willing to go that mile for you, so you can maintain that trust and that ability to be in your role.
You know, I did a similar, well, it's not similar. Let me rephrase that. I had a situation where I was very passionate about a situation that happened while I wasn't on site, and I came in fully emotionally charged. And in my mind, my team members are going to see how much I care based on how much this is emotionally affecting me. And it had the 100% opposite effect. And so I learned a very, very hard lesson, because I feel like I damaged some relationships because I thought I was doing the right thing, but allowing my emotions to guide my decisions in that situation. I now have a job of repairing a long road of repairing and rebuilding trust with certain people, and that was a lesson that I don't ever want to be in this situation again based on how it feels.
And I want to make a suggestion, and if it's not an agreeable one, by all means, let's talk about it. But I also want to say that for all the things we've been talking about as far as controlling your emotions and being able to remain detached, I also don't think that it's healthy for a supervisor to come across as completely stoic.
No.
You do not want to be the robot in the room who is always perfectly level and just approaches every conversation like you're recording a podcast for NPR, right? You don't want to be that person. It's okay to show your team that you're upset by something, that you're overjoyed by something, that you're sad by something, right? That things affect you, because you are a human being, and you have to be relatable to your team. Part of people wanting to come talk to you is knowing that you'll understand, that you're not this guy up on high ruling the team, right? That you're their leader, but you're like them. You're a human being, and but the part of self-awareness that we talked about earlier, right? Being able to control it and do it in a healthy way. It's okay to show your team that you're upset by a situation, but you have to do it in a way that's constructive. You have to, as Charles Koch would say, you have to deal with reality constructively.
Yes.
And that's the key.
Well, and for new to role leaders, the hardest thing to really grasp onto is understanding where to begin with emotional intelligence.
Yes.
And it's I've had my fair share of stumbles in over a decade.
Oh boy, howdy, have I ever had mine.
And let's define new. I've been in my leadership role at my current company for 2 years now, and I'm new. There's so many lessons that I haven't learned yet.
But being able to say, I'm new, I'm learning, I'm not tenured, I haven't experienced it yet, is a start to that journey. You're gonna stumble, you're gonna fall, you're gonna hit your face on the concrete or whatever you want to call the ground. You're gonna kiss it at some point.
Sure.
But it's how you get back up.
Right. And part of that is having the support from your leader, the person above you, to say, hey, you didn't handle the situation correctly. Here's what I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And digesting that feedback appropriately and trying to take that feedback and apply it.
And from your team as well.
Yes.
Yeah, from
Because
my
your
team
team,
as well.
your team will tell you, and
Absolutely.
sometimes not directly or verbally,
Or-
but they'll tell you.
Or very directly, and that's
Or
when
very
it
directly.
really stings, because the people that you are working so hard to build the trust with, and they let you know you've broken that trust, then that is not a fun thing to hear. Now, you could do one of two things. You could either let it make you jaded and cold and closed off, because what do they know? I'm the supervisor. What do they know? Or you
Made
can
that
be
mistake.
Made that mistake too.
or you can be like, you can show some humility and take the time, could be days, could be weeks, could be months, to apply what you learned and try to rebuild that relationship. Because I'm pretty sure I've said it before on this podcast, and I know I've said it in to you guys personally. It takes so much time to build trust, and it takes just a moment to break it. You can lose it so much faster than you gain it.
Trust is completely volatile because it's like, don't even have to consider leadership relationships. It could be friendships, it could be acquaintances, it could be just someone that you've met and you've had some kind of connection with. Do one thing that goes completely against principles, goes against your natural character, goes against anything you stand for, and not even realizing it, that you've done it, you already lit the fuse, and it could explode, or it could simmer, or it's completely gone.
Now, with that being said, all of that being said, there are times where you have to ride the storm because you're sticking to your principles, you're sticking to the mission, you're sticking to the end goal, and you have to know that you're not always going to make everyone happy.
Nope.
Absolutely.
So-
at the end of the day, from the company perspective, our main responsibility as leaders is to accomplish the mission, to get
Yes.
our team to accomplish the mission.
So if you
Yes.
can keep that at your forefront and have your compass, as one of our safety professionals said, don't lose your compass, as he retired.
Don't forget, point to true north.
You're going to gain that back in time once they are connected with the why, and if they as an employee are vested with with the company and want to be there for the long haul, eventually they're going to see the why, and eventually they'll probably come back and say, I didn't agree with it at the time, but now I see where you're going, and that takes time. And if you cave and try to meet their emotional need in that moment, you might derail your long-term goal.
Well, what it shows, sorry, Jed, I didn't mean to cut you off. What it shows is if you go from holding your guns on this instance and then taking back the exact opposite direction, going a 180, and then going back and forth and back and forth. The seesaw, the hem-haw, the inability to remain set causes you to lose more credibility.
Absolutely. Honestly, that's along the lines of what I was going to say, right? Consistency, while not necessarily on the directly related to the topic of emotional intelligence, consistency is vital.
Yes.
And that can be really hard, but that's also part of where emotional intelligence can benefit, because every situation is unique. And like you said, Nick, connecting them with the why is important, and helping them understand why what's happening is happening. And for me, a big way that has popped up in my career lately has been when it comes to disciplinary conversations, which I might be the only one, and that's okay too. I hate disciplinary conversations.
Why?
I don't think anybody likes disciplinary conversations. They're uncomfortable.
So I want to ask why.
They are uncomfortable.
Okay.
They're incredibly uncomfortable.
I think exactly what you had said, Nick. You can't please everybody. When I strive to have a personal relationship with everybody on my team, and within reason, within professional limits. I'm not friends with my team on Facebook. We don't hang out at the bar outside of work. But at work, I strive to know who they are as a person, what motivates them, what they're looking for in their career. Exactly, right? I need to know those things so I can help guide them down the right path, even if that path is not with me or on my team. If they're looking for something bigger or different, right, I can help them grow in a way that's going to benefit them. But along with that, it's really easy to be blinded to some things because, you know, I have this relationship with, I'm going to say Joe. I've got this relationship with Joe. And
Joe, I swear.
There's always Joe.
There's always a Joe, right?
There's always a Joe.
I've got this relationship with Joe, and he's been coming along in some key areas. He's really been growing. But today, he had a major, say, behavioral lapse, right? And with other people who have had similar lapses, I've had to take them into the office. We've had to have a conversation, which may or may not lead to official disciplinary action, right? Depending on the situation. So now I have to maintain consistency to that same standard, right? And not everyone's going to see their actions as the same. Joe may not see his actions as the same as what Sarah did a month ago. But I have to make sure that they understand why we're having this conversation. And oftentimes, for me, that starts with, you know, this isn't normal for you. And I'm concerned about where you're at, your well-being. Are you okay? Like, I start every one of those conversations with, are you okay? Is there something going on? Do you need something from me? And almost every time, right, I'll get a, no, I'm fine. And then I have to start with, okay, here's why I'm asking. I observed this behavior, and I need you to understand why that's not acceptable, why I can't have that on my team, or why we can't have that in this building or in this company. And I need you to understand why we're having this conversation, or why we're going to take this disciplinary action. And it's not because you aren't adding value to the team. And it's not because you're a bad person. It's because we need to steer a different direction.
Yep.
And I'm here to help you do that. If you need me, if there's something I can do to help you, I'm here for that. But I need you to understand why.
With that being said, there has to be effort on their part.
There does. Yeah, absolutely. But that's also part of, I don't know, maybe this doesn't connect as neatly into emotional intelligence as I think it does. But one of the things that I often say in those conversations is, I care about you and your well-being, and I want you to do well, and I want to help you meet your goals. But I have 39 other people that I have to do that for as well. And what you're doing right now is affecting their ability to do that.
Well,
Right?
I think
it's
fits.
not just that emotional intelligence to understand what that individual needs, but I have to have the emotional intelligence to understand that as much as I like Joe and I want him on my team for the way he performs and most of the stuff that he does, I have to address this behavior because it's going to affect everybody else on my team.
And that's probably one of the hardest things as a leader to do.
And I have to do something about it.
Because you got to separate it.
I have to. And exactly. And that's, you're talking about the detachment. That's part of that detachment. I don't want to have this conversation with Joe. I like Joe. I want Joe to be upbeat and happy and want to come to work. And I understand that if I make a misstep in this conversation, or even if I don't, Joe may not trust me the same way he did before, but I have to do this for the well-being of every other person on my team. If they're a vested
employee, eventually they're going to see the why. If they want to be there, if they want to be a part of the team, if they want to make a positive influence on their peers, eventually they're going to see the why.
Well,
absolutely.
And how I look at it is when you take that second in the conversation to insert that exact thing. Hey, I have X number of people that I also have to consider the exact same behavior for. Like you had said earlier, Nick. We need our leaders to help us be aware of our emotions, to be intelligent about our own emotions, to look at how we're emotionally charged. That is your moment to help your team member or your peer to realize that they are not aware of their emotions in this second.
Yep.
And that awareness, that motivation, that ability to prove consistency in how you present things can be the pivotal point in that conversation for that team member. I've had that said to me. I'm sure you both have had that said to you.
Absolutely.
By somebody that was your initial supervisor when you started. But think of how you would feel if they never said that to you.
Well, you wouldn't have ever known you're making a mistake.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And the accountability portion of this, and a lot of people take the word accountability to think right up.
Right.
Holding accountable, being written up, being punished, being reprimanded, whatever the phrase is. Emotional accountability is not just being written up. It's being proven that, hey, pause for a second and think about this. Because we are in that time period where we have matured enough to say, okay, well, let's have a think about this.
Yeah, and that really highlights in, like, we're going through annual reviews right now, and I witnessed somebody get feedback for something that happened earlier in the year, and I had to read. I'm the person sitting in, taking over that team, so I'm sitting in because I'm the new supervisor for that team, and I had to redirect that conversation of, this is a look at the entire year. So since you have made XYZ improvements based on this specific situation that was documented, this shows your growth.
Yep.
Just because it's in here doesn't necessarily mean it's a negative. It was a negative in that moment, but look at all the things that you've done to grow since then as a result.
Yeah, that category has shown improvement.
But if you
can be a positive thing,
yes.
if you're coming from a spot of not meeting expectations,
but
and
you have to
has shown improvement.
You have to illustrate that. Now, if you are in that review and all you do is talk about that one negative situation, and they are like, "Well, I've done all these things to grow," based on that interaction that you're not talking about. Well, that's failure on the leader's part.
Yes, it is. And it's being able to dial that back to say this is a reminder.
And that's to help them regulate their emotions.
Exactly. But also a chance for you to maintain the positive side of it and help them own this instance happened. Don't forget it because it did happen, but continue to show the improvement that you're not going to do it again.
Right. And that's not, and I'm not, I want to be clear here. I'm not knocking the person that was delivering the review.
Yeah.
But sometimes you need help with that message.
Yes.
And if you have that support there and you are that support and you can help redirect that conversation to help regulate that emotion, that's a positive
invaluable.
thing.
It is invaluable.
That's a very positive thing.
Because it shows that there's multiple people that have witnessed it and that have seen the growth and that it's not going to be a repetitive cycle. The benefits are there, and it just is a friendly reminder. But helping that team member see that don't linger on the past, maybe it's water on the bridge. Maybe it's a past chapter that's no longer being open, is now being written, something new. We all make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
If we are afraid to admit our flaws, We're afraid to admit our mistakes. We don't have anything to learn from, to grow from, and we're not being learners, especially emotional learners. We need that chance to regulate ourselves.
Correct.
I also like in those kinds of conversations, right, staying on that path of behavioral, I guess I'll use the same term I used earlier, behavioral discipline. I also, whether they say they're okay and don't need any help, right, which again is a pretty common response that I get because people struggle to admit that they're not in a good place. And, maybe they don't want to tell me what they're going through, and it's none of my business. And I accept that too. And so in all of those conversations, I also have one other key thing that I tell everybody. And that is, if you need to let something out, if you need to vent, if you're just at the end of your rope, you're frustrated, you're mad, and it's all bottled up and you feel it's going to blow up if you don't say something, just tell me that, right? Like the individual did when they felt like they wanted to go home. Come into my office and say, can I close the door and vent? And I will
set the stage.
100%. I will give you the time. Close the door. You can say anything that you want to me within reason, right? I mean, you can't.
Right.
There's still a limit, but it's a way, way, way higher line.
Your tolerance for language or your tolerance for their frustration goes through the roof.
Yeah, come in here and tell me the company's stupid. Come in here and tell me you don't respect my leadership. Come in here and tell me that you think the direction I just gave you guys 20 minutes ago is absolutely ridiculous, and here's all the reasons why I think that you should never have said those words to me, right? Yell at me, swear at me.
It might be a learning opportunity for you.
It might be.
It can help them get it out in the only way they know how.
Yep.
And then once they've got it out and they've kind of calmed down a little bit, we can have a productive conversation.
Yep.
And I can connect them to the whys. We can have that conversation now.
Yeah.
Whereas if I just tell them, don't let it happen again, get out of my office.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not setting the stage for them to be successful in the future. I'm
No.
laying down an expectation, which is important as well.
But
right?
you're damaging trust.
You're
I'm not
opening
giving
the
them any
stage.
tools.
Yep.
Right. I've said don't make that mistake again,
You
but I'm
just
not going to
close
tell you
that
how to
person
fix
off.
it.
You just close them off.
Well, you set the
If you
stage,
yeah.
and then you then at the very end you said that's never going to happen again. They're not going to trust you when you say
No,
okay,
because
go
it's
for
not
it.
realistic to say it's not going to happen again. Because
No.
people, especially when they're not in a leadership by title position, that may be the only way they know how to express themselves.
Well, and if that's the only way they know how to express themselves, then I have to give them the tools to express themselves differently.
Correct.
Yes.
And I can't
And
do
you can't
that
do that if you
I
dismiss
just shut
them.
them out.
Yeah,
exactly.
if you dismiss them, you've now shut them down.
Yep.
Exactly. I've told them don't let it happen again, and then I've given them the recipe to let it happen again.
And unfortunately, I've watched that happen as of the last year. I've watched that happen. Other leaders make the decision to shut a conversation down and not allow a person to have a voice in a conversation and in a disciplinary conversation, and now they don't trust that leader to go to them and be authentic.
Nope, not at all.
It is now they have a situation where they have to bury that and try to do the best they can just to survive.
Well, and that breeds negativity. That's going to pull a lot of heartstrings and a lot of I don't trust this person anymore.
Right, and I've seen it with senior leaders as of recently, making that mistake of closing off conversations, and now they're not approachable. That leader's not approachable, and they might not be for a long time unless they recognize that they closed that door and they start doing things to show the team that even though I'm in a senior leadership position, I care. And you're the reason why we're successful because you are the one on the floor actually performing the work.
One thing that I noticed over the decade I've been a leader is that the moment you're in your office, the power shift occurs because the team feels that that's your space. That is ultimately where a lot of, hate to say it, negativity comes out of that, because if you get called to the principal's office, you get called to the boss's office. Now it's a conversation that's shifted to you. But when they come in your office and they want to vent, they want to have that different kind of conversation.
Then it becomes their space.
It becomes their space.
Their safe space.
Their safe space. So it's got two meanings to it, but it can only be a safe space if you've invested enough time with the team on the floor, out of your office, to build and breed that connection, so they have the ability to do that, because they're not going to feel enough of a connection with you to break that space, to be able to say that I can have the other side of this coin where it's applicable. It's just always going to be, he's in his office, I can't disturb him because he's in his space. I never want.
Last time I tried to do that, he dismissed me.
Yeah, so the last thing that I ever want to be is a leader that's not approachable. I actually had a team member tell me that they can't read me because they can't tell when I have something that's bothering me, when I have something that I'm focused on, or I have something that is a difficult decision. That took a lot of time to build. But when that team member said that to me, I was like, I had to, when they left the office, I was like, wait, did he just talk to me? Because I don't think I'm that kind of leader that hides my emotions very well or hides my charge. But apparently this one team member had that presence that I gave off. It was their perspective of me.
So what did you do what did you do different next time?
The team member left the company before I could ever fix that perspective.
That's going to happen.
So I didn't have that ability to fix
and
that.
That's going to influence your decisions later on with other employees.
Exactly. And it's all comes full circle back to self-awareness, back to emotional intelligence, back to emotional accountability, back to building relationships. And how can we do that from the floor before we ever have to do it in our office?
Yep.
And I think shifting somewhat off of self-awareness, right? Like I mentioned earlier when I made my comment that I've got 39 other people I have to take care of as well, right? That I'm responsible for their well-being when they're here. The other part of that is that unfortunately, you mentioned that team member left before you could make any improvement, but sometimes, unfortunately, you can give people the tools and every opportunity, but they're not going to make the change they need to make. And I think that is connected as well in my mind with that emotional intelligence of the broader team, right? Understanding how that person's actions, their behavior, the things that they're saying or doing is impacting the well-being of the rest of your team. How are they emotionally affected by the things that individual is doing? And when it's time to say, you don't have the right to do this anymore to these individuals, I think it's time that we part ways. And that's a really, really hard discussion to have as well, especially if this is somebody who is a high performer and a generally likable individual, but they just can't maybe control their anger at work and they're lashing out at their coworkers. For me, a hard line in the sand with anybody is when somebody on my team says, I don't want to be here because of, I'm gonna pick on Joe, because of Joe, right? Joe did this and now I wish I didn't work here anymore. That's a hard line for me, that this needs to be correct. You need to correct this behavior and I'm going to give you the tools. I'm going to make sure that you're doing okay. And I want to help you succeed, but there's a limit. And that hard limit for me is you have now affected somebody else's mental and emotional well-being, and I can't have that.
No.
So if you're listening to this and you're striving to be a leader, this is a concept that maybe in practice and maybe in just in theory is an easy thing to understand, but I will tell you firsthand, it is not easy to put in practice, and it takes time, and you are going to make mistakes, and you have to accept that you are going to make mistakes. You are going to not be favorable in some people's eyes sometimes, and it is all about consistent, measurable growth on a personal level to improve. And don't let one interaction ruin you. use that as motivation to take what you can and learn from it and try to apply it later. Because at the end of the day, you might lose an employee, and that, for the next 20 years, they might remember you as the tyrant or as the disconnected leader or the person that didn't care about you. But what they don't realize is that if you are the one that is seeking knowledge and looking to grow every day, that is your motivation to do better. They'll never know it, and you may never make amends with that person ever. But that's something that you have to hold on to and grow from. So I want to say thank you to everybody who's tuned in, and hopefully you gained some perspective out of this conversation. And I want to say thank you to you guys for sharing your insight, your experiences. Hopefully you tune into the next episode where we can continue these types of conversations, and hopefully we are helping to influence your journey.
Thank you again, listeners. Catch us next week here on the Leadership Journal Table Talk, and hopefully Jed will be with us in the next episode as well.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.